to the Health Minister, Edward Argar, this morning. Very good morning to you, Mr Argar.
Morning, Susanna.
It's an important morning to have you on because the Vaccines Minister is writing in the Daily Telegraph today to keep the faith. All of us must keep the faith in the Oxford AstraZeneca jab. The trouble is, Mr Argar, we've had worrying news from South Africa where they have suspended their programme of giving out this jab because of the doubts over whether it prevents mild to moderate disease, and there is no data on whether it prevents serious disease. What can you tell us about what we know about the efficacy of AstraZeneca at the moment?
So you may have just seen or heard, probably not because you were presenting, I suspect, but on Radio 4 they had the professor who authored the study on this, who talked about, although it's a small study, only around 2,000 people, he pointed out that wasn't necessarily a factor in how reliable it was. The 3 points I would make on this are, first of all, the suspension of the rollout of this in South Africa. The health minister there said it's a short-term thing while they look at the data here. And the dominant variant in South Africa, as you might expect, is likely to be the South African variant. Here it isn't. The dominant variants here are the historic one we've had throughout this pandemic and the so-called Kent variant. And there is no suggestion that it is less effective against those. The second
point... The
point
trouble is, do we not have 100 recorded cases of the South African variant here? And
147.
How many, sorry?
147.
147, right. So it's gone up since the last time I looked at the figures. The trouble is, as we know, once something is seeded, unless we take very strong action to stop it, and even with the measures that we've had, we can't stop the spread completely of a new variant. So, in a way, that point is moot, isn't it?
Well, there's two things there. One is you're absolutely right about the importance of taking the measures, the surge testing, everything else to try and stop the variant moving around and replicating. But going back to the efficiency or efficacy of this vaccine, what the study suggested is that in a group of people, average age 31, so in younger people, it didn't appear to be as effective in preventing mild or less severe forms of the disease. What there isn't, though, is any suggestion that it is less effective in preventing serious or severe forms of the disease, in preventing hospitalizations or deaths, which is hugely important.
But Minister, given your uncertainty about this and given the obvious issues with the South African variant in particular and the efficacy of vaccines against it, I can't understand our border policy right now, because there are 41 countries with cases of the South African variant, but 29 of those have not been added to the UK's red list. And that means it's been estimated that 205,000 passengers from countries that have the South African variant may come into the UK before hotel quarantine is established in a week's time. I don't understand.
Can I very quickly, Piers, finish the point I was making, and then I'll answer exactly what you've just put to me. The point I just wanted to finish off is that the professor who authored the study was very clear earlier this morning in saying that his understanding is it does continue to be effective against preventing severe illness, hospitalisation, death, etc. from this. So that it's important we just put on the record this vaccine does appear at the moment to still be highly effective against that. To your key point there and your question there, we have a multi-layered approach to our borders, one of which is the passenger locator form, which is the bedrock of this. Everyone has to fill that in. You're fined if you don't. The airlines are fined if you don't. And that is checked up on to make sure that you know where you come from, where you are.
Sorry to interrupt. Why are you letting people in?
And then I'll come back.
Yeah, but why are you letting people in from countries that have the South African variant when you haven't got quarantine established yet in terms of the hotels?
Let me just finish the point. We do have quarantine established. Everyone is required to undergo a 10-day quarantine period.
But we know that most people aren't doing that. We know most people aren't doing that. That's why you're bringing in the enforced quarantine taken directly to hotels. But that isn't happening for another week. And in the meantime, 200,000 people will come in from countries with the South African variant. This makes no sense unless the reality is that you as a government have simply not prepared us again properly by having these hotels set up ready to accept people.
Piers, two things on that. First one is, I don't think it's entirely accurate to say pretty much everyone is ignoring the quarantine. People are following the quarantine. We are checking up on it, but not everyone is. You're right to highlight that aspect. On the quarantine hotels, They are, for want of a better way of putting it, another layer of defence, an additional layer beyond that passenger locator, beyond the enforcement, beyond the existing
They don't exist yet, Mr. Argar. I'm sorry to interrupt again, but none of them exist yet. You're not putting anybody into them yet. Where are the... How many hotels have you currently got ready to go for the quarantine?
Piers, you're always welcome to interrupt me if you want to chase up a point you're trying to make. We've made clear that this will come in from the 15th of February. It is an additional layer.
Right, but how many hotels right now do you have signed off and ready to go to accept the enforced quarantine?
I don't have the latest figure on the number that we've currently signed up on the contract.
I read yesterday there aren't any yet. Is that true?
The second point, let me come back on the second point.
It seems to me pretty vital. If you're bringing in enforced quarantine at hotels as the great new layer of defence, and you can't even tell us whether you've got any hotels ready to go. And the speculation I've read is there aren't any that have been signed off yet. And that is why you haven't got the enforced quarantine starting for another week. And in the meantime, hundreds of thousands of people will be pouring in here from countries with a South African variant. That seems to me a bit of a loophole in your incredibly strong border policy.
Two things, Piers, if I may. The first one is you wouldn't expect me to speculate on speculation, tempt me though you may try. The second bit,
I just asked you how many hotels you've got and you don't know the answer.
Bearing in mind it's coming in next week.
You don't know the answer, do you? You're the health minister and you've no idea if we've got any hotel. Do you know if we've got any hotels signed up?
Piers, will you let me answer the point you made about borders? You asked me a question about borders being closed and people coming in. I think you said 200,000.
Well, actually, the original question was I asked you, how many hotels do we have signed up ready to accept enforced quarantine? You don't know the number, but do you know if we have any?
I answered the question saying I do not know the answer to that question.
Do you know if we have any?
That's an honest answer to you.
Do you know if we have any? You're the health minister. This is the great new barrier to the South African variant. Do you know if we have any signed up?
First of all, I've not said this is the great new barrier to the South African variant. I've said this is part of an overall policy on our borders involving the existing...
But you wouldn't be bringing it in, Mr Argar, if you didn't think it was important. My question for you is very simply, do you as the health minister know if we have any hotels, as we're speaking right now, signed up to accept enforced quarantine?
I've made very clear I've answered that question. I do not know how many hotels have been signed up in the course of contract negotiations. I'm not running those contract negotiations.
You're the health minister. Wouldn't it be an absolute priority that you would know that information?
It appears I'm working very closely with our NHS on capacity. That's exactly my focus.
What's the biggest threat to this country right now? I would argue, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would argue all the unanswered questions about the South African variant right now should be this government's absolute priority. And yet it seems to me that when you have enforced quarantine coming in a week, with hundreds of thousands of people coming in from countries that already have this variant, that screams to me to be a major problem. And then I ask you as health minister, do we have a single hotel currently signed up to accept these people? And you haven't got a clue. And I'm sorry to be disparaging, but that seems pretty shameful that you don't have a clue if we've even got one.
Piers, I've made clear to you a number of things which you chose not to listen to. That's obviously your right. First one is this will come in from the 15th. I would await a further announcement from the Health Secretary who's going to set out more details of this on that, which I'm not going to preempt. I've answered your question honestly, which I think is really important.
You said you didn't know.
Yeah, and I answered honestly.
And I'm allowed to honestly respond to that by saying, how can you not know whether we have a single hotel signed up? I'm sorry, but you seem completely bemused that when you as health minister say, I haven't got a clue, and I say, well, do you even know if we've got one signed up? You can't tell me. And I'm sorry, I find that staggering.
Well, I'm afraid I don't find that staggering, Piers. I've said we will announce where we are. We will make a further announcement on this when we've got the contracts signed and delivered. And I've also been very honest with you that I am not the minister responsible for the contracts for the hotels. So I'm not close to that particular aspect of our multi-layered health response to this terrible pandemic.
Mr Argar, can I ask, in the absence currently of information about how many hotels we have for a policy that is supposed to be introduced exactly a week today, I mean, it seems remarkable that we don't seem to be prepared. But what percentage of people do currently fulfil the isolation requirement when they come into the UK?
Well, we've seen a number of studies, a number of surveys suggesting, alluding to what Piers says, that a significant number don't. I think it was Dido Harding who quoted more broadly about self-isolation, that a significant percentage, I think she quoted 20,000.
Well, she said 20,000.
20,000 said that they had not complied with every sort of letter of that. That's clearly very concerning.
Well, it's particularly concerning if we don't know how many people who are coming into the UK are actually self-isolating. Do you have a percentage on that?
Now, I don't have a direct percentage on that, but what I can talk to you about is the enforcement we
Mr.
put
Argar,
in.
can I ask you, do you read briefs?
Yes, I do, Piers.
I mean, you don't seem to know anything about numbers, about anything to do with the crucial restrictions of this virus. I mean, we have a mutation from South Africa that we know is very hazardous, that may have more strength against the vaccines. It should be the government's #1 priority. You don't know how many people are obeying isolation as it is. You've no idea if we've even got one hotel that is ready for the enforced quarantine. It's not coming in for another week anyway, by which time we let in hundreds of thousands more people. I just think that you are the health minister. I don't think it's unfair or irrational of us to expect you to know these answers.
No, and I'm seeking to answer your questions, Piers. I always
You don't know the answers.
When I come on your show. I've said you will see.
I'd love you to answer them, but you don't.
Piers.
The truth is, you don't know the answers. So maybe, look, I think we should end it here. And I honestly recommend you go and get the answers. And if you want to come back tomorrow with the information we've asked, I think our viewers would greatly appreciate it. You are the health minister. Anyway, we've got to leave it there. Mr. Argar, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Vernon Kay has been doing...
Are we being unfair? I get accused of haranguing these ministers. Is it unfair to expect the health minister to know if we have a single hotel signed up for this enforced quarantine?